Okay, we're now recording. Uh, Tomorrow's our last broadcast, so I really enjoyed getting to know you guys. It's been a pleasure to spend this time with you, and not sure you can say the same thing, but I hope it wasn't too boring. And we, uh, I've still got one assignment from last week to grade, and I will send those grades over to you today to see. And so we'll have week two pretty well in the books, and then I'll start working on week three as soon as we get done with that and try to get the grades in really quickly. Any questions about anything you have before we get too far away from the launching point here?
I'm good.
Okay.
No.
Well, I try to be very fair. Um, I'm not here to beat up on you and hurt your grades. I'm here to try to help you. Oh, and by the way, the for most of you, I sent an email, but for most of you, I did the video grading for Moodle for your case study. I didn't get everybody. I think there's one or two that I didn't do the video. I started halfway into the grading. So look that over. That's a little easier than just some more words to read. You have to look at my ugly face, but other than that, it's just a kind of a great way to grade. And I'll probably do all of the homework that way so that everybody will have at least one experience with that. And keep working on Moodle. Don't give up on it, because I'm thinking before you get finished with your program, everybody will be on that as much as possible and get all the bugs out of it. And most of it's a learning curve, and but it's helpful to have all those things down. I tell you what, it's learning new software and things are a big part of what we have to do in the learning curve. You'll be hit with that time and time again. Once you get into nursing more, there's always something new to learn, and you're going to always be working on updating your skills and keeping current with your field. As I've said, it's going to be a lifetime occupation. Just what's new in the field and changes and protocols and all those things are going to be a full-time job in itself. So I encourage you to do that. You know, what really worries me, nurses are kind of forced to do that. Doctors are not so much. And I asked my doctor one time how often he went back for recertification. There's no law about that, I don't think. They don't have to do recertifications or modernizations. He hadn't taken a class in 40 years. And I thought, do I really want a doctor that's 40 years behind the latest thoughts on things? And so you really have to, you have to watch out for your own health, but you have to also think about keeping up with the latest and the greatest. But anybody have any other concerns before we talk about the death penalty and punishment and things this morning? Okay. Be sure that you read through the text. Chapter 15 actually is not uh, huge, but it was just something I wanted to mention in passing about the death penalty and punishment. The record for this country on both of those is not really stellar. As you probably know and have heard, the numbers of people incarcerated, the last year that we have figures on that, 2014, we had over 2.2 million people that were incarcerated in federal, state prisons, and local jails. And that doesn't even include the number of offenders that are on probation or in some kind of program or whatever. That number looks more like almost 7 million people. And that is, and we have the world's largest prison population at about 20%. There's 10.35 million people in prisons around the world, and 20% of those are in the United States. So 1/5 of the world's population are in prisons. And as you very well know, that is a downward spiral. once someone is charged and convicted and goes to prison, the it's just a snowball effect, because once they come out, then they're limited in their jobs that they can hold. They're not able to vote usually, all kind of things. And so that really is a problem, as most of you've talked about, living in places where crime is high. Uh, that is a problem with our young people and our older people alike, but mainly our young people. Once they get into those situations, it's very difficult to have a life that you would would be concerned about. Public is concerned, I think, about crime. We hear all these horrible stories, but crime is actually gone down, which is interesting. In many of the states that have eliminated uh, capital punishment, crime has gone down. So it raises a lot of questions about whether the way we handle crime and punishment is the most effective way. I think I told you the other day that I lived in Colorado. They have this new supermax prison where they put all of the terrorists and the more violent offenders. And that place is absolutely, if you were to be able to ever escape from there, you'd never make it to any civilized place on the planet, because the conditions and the weather and the wild animals or something would get you before you got anywhere. But they do have, like we talked about, Dylan Roop, the white kid that killed the people in the church in Charleston, South Carolina. He's there, and guys from 9/11 and a lot of the other people that are there, and will be there, most of them, for the rest of their life if they're not uh, set for for execution. So, what are your thoughts on the death penalty? Uh, do you think that is an effective measure? Or I mean, this is one of those ethical questions that we talk about all the time. Is the death penalty viable in some cases or no cases, or should it be taken off the table?
I don't feel it should be taken off the table for all cases. Yet I don't agree with someone judging or being able to say when you live or when you die. I just think it's the certain situation. So I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted about this issue as well, because a lot of people that are on death row, like, I don't know, they have um, I feel like they give people, like, say for instance, if you sell drugs or something, I feel like they're giving more drug dealers like those kind of penalties besides murderers or people who do those kinds of crimes. So I'm kind of conflicted. I think it just depends.
I think it'd be interesting to see. I think our prisons, that big number I just gave you, I think a lot of I'd like to know what percentage of that are drug related. And I think you're right. I think we over punish some things and maybe under punish others. If you're going to put somebody on death row, the time between sentencing and execution, there is a lot of considerations with that. How much time is a viable time for them to get their appeals done? And it just can't go on forever and ever, right? And I think that's a problem we have with death row. Um, but I think that there are some crimes that deserve the death penalty. Uh, and I think others are, I mean, this three strikes and you're outlaw. I think that is a huge thing that needs to be looked at, because that applies to drug dealers. If they
Hmm.
get caught three times, they're in for life.
So
Uh,
what do you think about, I'm sorry to cut you off. There is, I think I read something about a state, when they commit sex crimes and they rape children and things, those men are being castrated.
hmm
So how do you feel about that? Do you think they should castrate them, or do you think they should be in, in jail? Because ultimately we're paying for them to be in jail. So, do you think they should be in jail, or should they be castrated and that's their punishment? Or, should they be cast off and, be executed.
You know what's interesting about Muslim countries when you compare our country to say, Saudi Arabia, uh, they don't have many reoffenders. If you're caught for stealing, they cut off your hand. If you're caught for stealing a second time, they cut off your other hand, and then third time is a death sentence. And they literally take you from the courtroom and behead you in public. Um, the rapist, as you say, usually ends up is castrated the first time, but they also don't have the same personal rights that we do, and that's been an issue as we talked about when we were fighting terrorists. If we bring terrorists that we capture to American soil, we have always given them the rights, any rights of an American. Once you got your foot on American soil, you have the right to a lawyer, you have a right to habeas corpus, you have a right to be charged within a reasonable time or not be held in jail. That's why they set Gitmo up so they could do things in Cuba that they couldn't do here. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with having a prison where even terrorists are tortured and abused. I'm very much on the side of rights. The other thing that concerns me greatly is the likelihood of a person being charged with crimes they did not commit and spend 10, 15, 20 years of their lives in prison for something and then be proved innocent. Those people, I really feel for that. There was a guy on America's Got Talent this week that's singing. I don't know how many years he spent in prison, but he was actually freed on DNA evidence. And he had spent 20 years of his life sitting in prison, innocent. I don't know how you get around that. I don't know there's so many issues here that are ethical issues that we ought to be concerned about. It breaks my heart that so many of our young men get caught up in the system when they get sent to prison, even if they were innocent or even if it was a drug crime or whatever. They're probably going to be a different person when they come back. Now, talking about drugs, I just moved from Colorado where marijuana is legal. And I'm here to tell you that is not the answer to the problem. Legalized marijuana has destroyed that state. People have moved in there because it is legal. I mean, some people move for medical reasons, and that's another ethical issue. If you had a medical problem, your child did, Asperger's or, all these ADHD even, some people treat with marijuana. Would you treat your child with marijuana? But I mean, there are people panhandling everywhere in Colorado, and the states around them. People drive over the border, buy marijuana, take it back, and have a problem in their state. So legalizing drugs to take away the underbelly, if you will, is not the answer. There's so many pieces of this problem with criminal justice that we don't even we can't consider them all. So, I'm conflicted as well. I mean, that's why it's an ethical problem. I want everybody to be treated with a level playing field. That's my first requirement. That I don't care if the kid's black or white or green or blue for that matter, that they deserve the right to good representation and a level playing field, and that they should not get a harsher sentence than another person of similar, situation. And I think, when we have judges that they're not on the same page, they might do that. I mean, they may get extremely different sentences from state to state or whatever. We don't have consistency a lot of times in our legal system. Big subject. Surely somebody else has something they want to say about this. Or are we taking a nap?
I feel like a lot of times reoffenders as well, they get comfortable in that situation. So it really doesn't bother them a whole lot. Like, and then I feel like a lot of men and women that resort to crimes because that's their only escape for having a roof over their head, for making sure they're getting 3 square meals a day,
Mm-hmm.
you know, somewhere to sleep at night. Um, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think that like some people that's incarcerated, they get used to that lifestyle. So they really,
I think there is a segment that does do that. They want to reoffend to get back in, and because that's the life
mhm,
they know. It's like living on the street. I mean, people that don't work and live on the street and make a living by hook or crook or whatever, they get used to that. It's very hard to unlearn, and depending on when, I think about the number of young people that goes into juvie, and then they just graduate up to the big time. They do something, if it's murder or trying not to get the death penalty, but to get long sentences so that you just don't have to deal with life. People just want to be told what to do, when to eat, when to take a bath, what to wear. It takes away a lot of things you have to work on as far as choices. But I don't know how much reform. I don't think there's much effective reform internally. Uh, we have all these things when they come out, like halfway houses and counseling. How effective do you think that is?
I think it's effective for some. It just depends on their mindset and if they want to do right or not. But we also have a lot of people who their mental isn't very right, so they do go back out and reoffend, doing the same thing.
Well, the other issue that we have is the lack of treatment, mental health treatment. We did in South Carolina, I'm sure everybody else did the same, cutting budgets, probably under Reagan, where they got rid of so much funding for mental health issues. And this plays into all these things recently we've seen with, I mean, the guy that had the mental breakdown that was running naked down the street that got killed by the cops. Uh, when you turn people on the street, you medicate people, just put them back on the street. Say somebody with schizophrenia, they're not going to take their meds, and we say, oh, we'll just give them the medicine, but that's not the solution to the problem. When you don't have somebody there monitoring and making sure they take their medications and all this stuff, what percentage of this are mentally ill people, are mentally disturbed people that need some help, and they run into trouble with the law, end up getting killed or worse. But there's no place to put people other than in the prison system, which only makes the problem worse. To put a mentally ill person into a prison is not a cure. It's not helpful. It just makes them more, more disturbed. And you think about that with young people, putting young people into situations like that, how much more detrimental that is to their mental health.
I think it's a for sure fire way of getting them hurt or not or killed even,
Yeah.
because a lot of people a lot of people are not sensitive or even know when they're even faced with a mentally ill person. So I think it's just, I don't know, it puts a lot of mentally ill people at risk, for that fact. Oh, I'm sorry, Sam, I stepped on your tail.
I'd like to see numbers on the number of people that get killed inside prisons, and I'm sure it's fairly
Mhm.
large. I'm sure that number is not publicly, shared very often. But I mean, these things, the other issue with crime and punishment is deterrence. Do you think punishment deters many people from recommitting a crime?
Only if you allow it to. I do feel that once you have been through a severe situation and caused the crime, you could be, rehabilitated. However, the world itself makes it so hard for convicts or ex-cons and felons to get jobs I ain't got no choice but to go get a pack.
Mm.
Because I mean, how I'm gonna feed my family or how I'm gonna feed myself if they not, even giving me a job because I done committed robbery or I done killed the person. So you either got to start your own business or you back to selling drugs again. It's hard. You want to do right when you come home, but America make it merely impossible to.
And how important is it, do you think, to have support structures outside of prison to help with getting people back into, you know, getting them back into the mainstream is a huge deal.
Yeah.
You know,
And then in some instances, like how, an 18-year-old to get tried as an adult and then they do 10 years because they committed a crime. And then they don't really know. So when they come home at 28 and they trying to restart their life, America make it so hard to get a job. So it's like, now what other choice do I have? It's nothing really in place for them. It's no nothing, none of that for them to want to get right and do right. I don't think it's an excuse because it is ex-felons and convicts that have good jobs. You know what I mean? But it's still very hard for them to find it.
well, that's the point I made at the beginning, that once you've been convicted, that is almost like wearing a scarlet letter on your head. You're never going to get that brand off of you. And, no matter how, the other issue, like sex offenders that have to do the sexual registry and have to report and all those things, there is no likelihood that they're going to get a job if they tell the truth, about what they were convicted of or about they're on the sex registry. I don't know who would hire them, or, but the other issue is, what segments of our society are waiting out there for former prisoners to take them in? There are groups that look for them, like, people in gangs and, crime syndicates, all these things. Those are the kind of people they're going to recruit. And yet people that have the jobs or could really help them get back into a normal lifestyle, they refuse to do that. So, where do you go? You go where you can make the living, and usually the living is back into drugs, back into crime, back into whatever, and, going to be reoffending back in prison if you get caught and all those things. So it's a huge issue with, punishment, with responsibility, with sentencing. Uh, Prisons are not good places normally. Um, and how do you deal with it? I think we've kind of thrown in the towel on this. I don't hear much discussion now about uh, Bureau of Prisons trying to be proactive. I actually started a school in Arizona State Prison. I had a Bible college, and the uh, chaplains that were there called me and asked me. They didn't have any money, and asked me would I do it pro bono, and we did. And we ended up with about 300 students, but they're sitting in a cell all day, nothing to do. And so they would take our course and the Bible and whatever, and sit there and spend their time learning something, bettering their education, getting a degree. And we had some really tremendous results internally for that. And I think that education, again, as we've said, is a major plus in turning people's lives around. But you've got to give them tools like a college degree, so that they're much more likely. It shows some progress, and they're much more likely to get hired with a college degree coming out of prison that they earned to show they were doing something in prison to better themselves, than you just turn them on the street and they come out the way they went in, and they have no advantages whatsoever to bettering themselves or getting back to normal. Anybody else have a comment?
Do you think it should be mandatory for all all people that's in prison to make it a, what's the word for it? you have to make it where they have to do something like that. If they don't have a high school diploma, that's the stipulations upon their release. They have to get their diploma, or they have to get some type of trade training, or some type of, some type of form of diploma.
I think the
Do you think
GED is not a bad idea,
mandatory?
or the trade training. I don't think everybody's meant to go to college. And I think that's kind of a wrong view we have today, that we are trying to force everybody into that pigeonhole. But I think the GED is just a basic mark of basic skills. I think that would be a given. I mean, you can't make people do anything if they don't want to do it. But I think for the ones that would do it, there ought to be a way for them to do it. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah,
You agree or disagree?
I agree.
I mean,
I,
lot of it's, I'm
I
sorry, go
agree.
ahead.
No, I was saying I agree too.
I mean, you can't make people do anything, and I learned that a long time ago. Even even the people around you, you can't make your kids do what you want them to do always, but you can make the situation as easy as possible for them to do right. And I think a lot of this thought has to be developed around this, and it's got to be people with empathy and people that care. I really think, having been a pastor, I think this is an area where the church ought to be more active. They could do a lot of these things. So rather than just go in and preach to people about how you ought to change, uh, provide them with a program to better themselves. Use the church resources to help people coming out of prison to, at least a halfway house or something to where they have a place to live while they're getting their feet on the ground, help them with employment and, things that would not be threatening, put them in positions where, if they're sex offenders, they're not in contact with children or young people or whatever. I think we could do a lot better job of that. And the problem is, I think that a lot of parents have abrogated their right in their children's training to the schools. And I think the church and other social institutions have given everything over to the government for them to take care of it because it relieves them of responsibility. But the government is never a good source for helping people at a level that cares and is empathetic. I mean, they can give you money, but they don't solve the poverty problem or the welfare problem or the food stamp problem by handing you stuff that will feed you for a day, but it doesn't feed you for a lifetime.
Oh, you hit that on the head, Mrs. Smith.
I mean, I think we perpetuate poverty when we do that. We help people take the money we waste in military stuff and give these kids that want to go get a college education. If they're coming from the hood or wherever, if they want to go get a college education, we ought to pay for that. They ought not have a financial problem if they want to go get an education. I think Bernie Sanders is right about that. We waste enough money in this country to pay for the college education of every kid that wants to get one. If we cut out some of the wasted stuff. And I think that's the biggest way. If you give young people hope, they're not going to turn to crime and to gangs and all this stuff. They're going to fill their life with something. And if we don't give them something to fill their life with, they're going to turn to darker things. But I think this is a huge ethical discussion that we need to be a part of. We need to be a part of that conversation. Anybody else want to say something before we move on?
No.
So there's a lot of legal issues here. The book talks about this. Of course, we know already there's a racial piece of this that is not pretty. The large number of people in prison are young black men. That's probably the largest single group that's there. Why they're there, is about socioeconomic issues many times, you know, all kind of stuff that we've talked about through this ethical thing, and the cost. You know, the cost of what we're doing in crime and punishment. If we could take that money and somehow use that to help others, you know, make a difference. It costs usually more than $1 million to keep a person on death row until they are, or until they are killed. And so basically read through these sections.
Excuse me? It's like $1 million.
Well, most of them stay on death row 20 years. And feeding
See,
them.
that's my issue right there. Why would you leave someone on death row for 20 years knowing you're anticipating on killing this person anyway?
Oh, yeah.
Person has a death day. Why would you do that? Why is it a law to do that?
Because they got to get their money out of it first.
So
It's ridiculous.
Don't you know they get like somewhere close to like almost $2,500 a day that somebody locked up?
Yeah, that's right. That is right. It's an astronomical. See, one of the things that's interesting is they've gone to this prison as a business because the prisons are so overcrowded and so full. Now in Colorado especially, you can open a business as a prison, and the state will pay you so much per day to take these prisoners and incarcerate them in your little prison and take care of them. Now that's fraught with all kind of problems. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But they're farming out this business of of punishment to people that aren't they have no control over them, basically. I mean, you think about these guys over in Afghanistan and Iraq, these military suppliers and these mercenaries that they hire. That's basically the same thing. We're hiring mercenaries to build and staff and man prisons and keep prisoners and kind of off the grid, so the federal government's not watching them. And they never did do a very good job watching them to begin with. But can you imagine how much worse these kind of things are?
Are you talking about, Mr. Smith, the private prisons or the ones that we basically know about? Because I know I've just now been like reading up on like stuff like that. There's a lot of private prisons that we don't know about.
Oh yeah,
you know,
I mean they're not billed and talked about in public, but it's a way of handling overcrowding. That, say, Colorado, they have all these prisons that are private businesses, enterprises that are not a part of the U.S. prison system, and they will take prisoners, you know, a certain level of prisoners, and the government will pay them so much per day to take that prisoner, and they do their time in these private prisons, basically. And I mean, that has all kind of ethical issues to me. It raises all kind of red flags, you know, about what we do with our people. You know, American history. I don't know if you know this or not, but after Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor, we rounded up every Japanese American, and put them in concentration camps. And we took all their stuff, and we held them in these concentration camps until after the war. And then after the war, we turned them loose and said, okay, you can go now, but we never gave them their stuff back. Has anybody ever heard that before?
Nope, I mean, something new to me.
I mean, we always do that. You know, we changed the laws after every war, World War I, World War II, and made it against the law to speak against the government during wartime. That if you spoke against the president or whatever, you could be arrested and sent to prison. So the whole issue of freedoms and all this stuff, you know, is huge. I don't disagree with these people that get wrongly convicted, suing and getting money for it. I think they ought to be reimbursed for their 20 years or 10 years that they spent in prison when they were innocent. I think those things are pretty important. Well, I thought you might find some some interest in this chapter. And of course, we know, you know, there's a really excellent discussion of the Jim Crow, the new Jim Crow, they call it, and on page 400 of your book is an ethical issue. I encourage you to read that. There's one on our prisons obsolete that something we've talked about here, and then speech in favor of capital punishment, what those issues are, and when is it just to execute a person for the crimes that they have committed. So those things are interesting. Chapter 16, I'm not going to talk very long about that, but it's about environmental ethics and about the ethical issues around, you know, the environmental issues that we're having today and global warming. That's another huge battle. And I think we're seeing the importance of that in all these freaky storms and flooding and hurricanes and things. You know, we have a government that is in the middle of denying that there's any kind of environmental meltdown going on. And there again, it's that battle between science and religion, or science and culture. And they say, well, we're only talking about a 1 degree difference in change in the environment. That doesn't sound like a lot to us, does it? But you realize that a 1 degree change in the temperature warmer is enough to melt the polar ice caps. And if you don't realize how serious that is, they're now running ocean liner tours around the north of Canada, where they were never able to do that before because of the frozen nature. So the melting also raises all the water levels on the planet. And if global warming, they're now predicting that within 25 or 30 years, that about 1/4 of the Earth's land, where most people, so many millions of people live around the coastlines of China and India, where huge populations will be affected, are going to be flooded out of places to live, which is going to drive them inland and take up less and less property. But yet, our government doesn't believe in the United States that we ought to be trying to help prepare for this problem. It's going to be another COVID deal. We just ignore it until it's too late to do anything about it. And I think that's something else that we need to think about. You know, as we move forward, there's a lot of these issues that are very ethical. There's great science behind these things are going on. And 1 degree, I mean, if you look at our planet and our position in the universe, if we were 1 degree closer to the sun, we would burn up. Or if we were 1 degree further away from the sun, we'd freeze to death. So the world we live in, you know this from being a nurse, the human body is a very delicate instrument. It doesn't take much as far as chemicals or whatever else to throw off the entire balance of the human body. Well, the whole society is that way. You know, that we're on a very thin line as far as survival as human beings. But climate change is a huge thing. The greenhouse effect, global warming, climate change, all those things kind of fit into the same categories. Depletion of the ozone, waste disposal, pollution. You know, there's actually a clump of plastics in the Pacific Ocean now, they say, is almost the size of the state of Texas, from just people dumping stuff, throwing stuff in the waters, and we're polluting and destroying our own communities. And people just don't care, you know, about issues like that. You know, any comments, questions? I would encourage you to read chapter 16 on the environmental ethics and raise those questions. Anyone else have a comment before we close? Well, if there is nothing else, let me cut off the recording here.